The Harvesters! Nestled in the heart of a dense forest, the small town of Grimsby had always been a quiet place, its residents living in harmony with the surrounding wilderness. But as the autumn chills settled in, a sense of dread enveloped the town like a thick fog. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones about a night that brought terror, the Harvest Night. For generations it was said that when the moon turned blood red, creatures formed from the very flesh and bone of the land would rise from the earth. These beings were not mere figments of imagination. They were the remnants of those who had gone missing over the years, twisted into grotesque forms by a dark force that fed on fear and despair. Despite the warnings, a group of teenagers, driven by rebellion and thrill-seeking, decided to test the legend. Clara, Tom, Mia, and Jake, all eager to prove their bravery, gathered in the woods just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The moon began to rise, casting an eerie crimson glow over the landscape. "Are you sure about this?" Mia asked, her voice wavering as she peered into the darkening trees. "What if the stories are true? Oh, come on," Tom laughed, brushing her off. "It's just a bunch of old wives' tales. We're not children anymore." Clara grinned, trying to mask her own unease. "We'll just go a little deeper and come back before midnight. It'll be fun." As they ventured into the woods, the air grew cold around them. The trees creaked as if whispering secrets to one another, and the distant rustle of leaves felt like a warning. The deeper they went, the darker it became, until the moonlight barely penetrated the canopy overhead. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees, causing them to freeze in their tracks. "What was that?" Jake whispered, eyes wide. "Probably a bear," Tom replied, though his bravado faltered. "Let's keep moving." They pressed on, the darkness thickening around them. Clara felt a gnawing sensation in her stomach, but she pushed it aside, determined to prove her courage. Just then, a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was coming from deeper in the woods. "Did you hear that?" Clara gasped. "Yes," Mia said, her voice trembling. "We should go back." Before they could decide, the ground beneath them trembled. From the depths of the earth, grotesque figures began to rise, their forms twisted and deformed. Bodies that had once been human now bore the marks of their gruesome fate, skin stretched tight over bones, eyes hollow and devoid of life. The creatures, known as the Harvesters, moved with a sickening grace, and their limbs bending in unnatural angles. They were a nightmarish blend of flesh and bone, stitched together as if crafted by a madman. Clara's blood ran cold as she realized these were not just stories, they were flesh and blood horrors driven by an insatiable hunger. "Run!" Clara screamed, breaking the paralysis that gripped them. The group bolted through the trees, branches snapping against their skin as they raced deeper into the woods. The Harvesters followed, their growls echoing around them, filling the air with dread. Clara could hear the sound of their bones cracking and snapping like dry twigs. "Split up!" Tom shouted, trying to lead them to safety. "It'll confuse them!" Desperation took hold as they veered off in different directions. Clara sprinted through the underbrush, heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the others screaming in the distance, but she forced herself to focus on escaping. Just as she thought she had lost them, Clara stumbled upon a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood an old, crumbling stone altar, overgrown with vines and moss. It looked as if it had been there for centuries, untouched by time. Panting, Clara approached the altar, her instinct screaming for her to leave. But before she could turn back, she heard a voice, a soft, pleading voice that sent chills down her spine. "Help me!" She looked around, but there was no one there. The voice persisted, echoing in her mind, drawing her closer. Clara felt an awful compulsion to reach out to the altar, her fingers grazing the rough stone. Suddenly she saw a vision of the Harvesters, their twisted faces morphing into those of her friends, their eyes filled with terror. "Clara, please, help us!" they cried, their voices blending into one haunting chorus. She recoiled, the horror of realization hitting her like a punch to the gut. The Harvesters were once people who had been taken and transformed into these monsters. They were victims of the very darkness she had come to confront. "No, I won't help you," she shouted, backing away in terror. But the altar pulsed with dark energy, and Clara felt a pull she couldn't resist. The ground trembled again, and the Harvesters emerged from the tree line, their grotesque forms closing in around. "Join us," one of them hissed, its voice a sickening blend of familiarity and malice. "Become one with the harvest." Panic surged through Clara as she turned to flee, but the creatures were too close. They reached for her, their fingers like skeletal claws, and in that moment she realized she had to fight back. Summoning all her strength, she grabbed a jagged rock from the ground and swung it at the nearest creature. The impact connected, and the creature let out a guttural howl, stumbling back. Clara didn't hesitate. She bolted back into the woods, her heart racing as she ran for her life. She could hear the others calling her name, their voices laced with fear. "Clara, where are you?" Follow my voice, she screamed back, pushing through the underbrush until she found them huddled together, cornered by the harvesters. Clara, help! Mia cried, her eyes wide with terror. In that moment, Clara understood. They had to face this darkness together. We can't give in. We have to fight. With renewed determination, they armed themselves with rocks and branches, standing back to back as the harvesters closed in. The creatures lunged at them, but the group swung their makeshift weapons, striking at the flesh and bone monstrosities. A fierce battle ensued, chaos erupting in the moonlit clearing. With each blow, the harvesters shrieked, their forms disintegrating into a cloud of ash and bone dust. But for every creature they struck down, more rose to take their place, driven by an insatiable hunger for fear. As the fight raged on, Clara noticed something. The altar pulsed with energy, and the harvesters seemed drawn to it. We need to destroy that altar, she shouted, pointing at it. Are you crazy? Tom yelled, barely dodging a grasping hand. We can't get near it. We have to try. It's the source of their power. With a shared look of determination, the group made a break for the altar, dodging the grasping hands of the harvesters. They reached the stone structure, and Clara took a deep breath, feeling the dark energy swirling around her. Together, she shouted. We're on 3. 1, 2, 3. They struck the altar simultaneously, their combined force meeting the stone with a deafening crack. The altar trembled, and a blinding light erupted from within, casting the creatures back as they shrieked in agony. The ground shook violently, and as the light engulfed the clearing, the harvesters began to dissolve, their flesh and bones scattering like ash in the wind. The energy from the altar surged, pushing Clara and her friends back as they shielded their eyes. When the light finally faded, silence fell over the forest. The harvesters were gone, and the oppressive atmosphere that had haunted the woods lifted, leaving only the sound of their ragged breaths. We did it, Mia whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. But Clara knew this wasn't the end. The darkness that had taken root in the land would always linger, waiting for another harvest night. They had fought bravely, but they would always bear the scars of what they had faced. As they stumbled back toward town, the moon began to wane, and with it, the last remnants of the night's terror faded into memory. But in the depths of the forest, a new silence had settled, a silence that would not last forever. The darkness was patient, and the harvesters would rise again.